How's it going? It's me, Severin7, and today I'm bringing you the 5 standard decks I am most excited to try with the new Edge of Eternity set coming out and a rotation looming on the horizon. With these two things in concert, standard is going to be getting a big shakeup, lots of new things are going to be viable, and I have got the spice for you. So we're going to go over these decks on Moxfield. If you end up liking the decks, you think they're cool, you think they're fun, you want to give me a quick like and a follow over there on Moxfield, that would greatly help me out. I'm so excited to share these with you, so let's get right into it. All right, here's the first deck. So this is Esper Control. This is going to be a very traditional control list with a lot of permission, a lot of disruption, and a couple of grindy, mid-rangey threats to end the game with, just the way the Magic Gods intended. For control players, anyway. So we're just going to go down the list from top to bottom. So we're going to play 2 copies of Elspeth Stormslayer and Meringue River Regent. These are going to be our win cons in most cases. There is another win con from the new set down below, which we'll get to in a moment, but these are going to be our 2 primary win cons. Control the board, resolve one of these 2 threats, beat your opponent down with them, and win. To support that, below these 2 creatures, we have some instants and sorceries, namely Sunfall 2.0, which we're running 1 copy of, nothing too crazy. I'm running a split between Beyond the Quiet and Deadly Cover-Up. It's possible that we may end up wanting to play Ultima over Deadly Cover-Up, but for right now, I want to test Deadly Cover-Up as the one other destruction-based 5-drop board wipe, because I like the fact that we can remove something from their deck with it. So maybe Ultima's better, depends on how popular artifact decks are. So for now, Deadly Cover-Up, Beyond the Quiet are what I'm choosing, as well as 2 copies of Day of Judgment and a single copy of 0 Point Ballad. I like this card a lot because it gives us a little bit of flexibility. It lets us get rid of a bunch of tokens for like 2 mana. It lets us get rid of just smaller stuff for a couple of life, and then later on in the game, if we end up paying 6 or more for this, we can get something back from the graveyard that we destroyed, which is pretty sweet. So it's just a one of to test out, because I think it's a really sweet spell and I like the way it works. Obviously 3 copies of Stock Up. We're only running 3 because we're splitting that up with Consult the Stars, which we were running 3 copies of. This card is insane. For 2 mana, you get an instant that says, look at the top card, X cards of your library, where X is the number of lands you control. Put one of those cards into your hand. If the spell is kicked, put 2 instead. So for 2 mana, however many lands you have, you're digging that far and picking a card. And then if you pay 2 more mana, you're picking 2 cards. So it's basically like Memory Deluge, but potentially even better in the late game, because you can go super deep if you have a lot of lands. And really make sure you're finding those answers that you need, those win cons. And then removal wise, we've got 3 Bitter Triumphs and 3 Get Lost. And then we're also running 6 counters in 3 No More Lies and 3 Steps Ahead. And with all of the stock ups and Consult the Stars that we have, it should not be difficult to find these. And then moving down, we have a few artifacts. We've got a single copy of Ghost Vacuum to help deal with graveyard stuff. We've got 2 copies of Pinnacle Star Cage as our replacement for Temporary Lockdown. Now, this does not do as much as Temporary Lockdown, but it also sort of has a win con attached to it in the late game. If we end up exiling a lot of stuff with this, later in the game for 8 mana, we can pay 8 mana and put all the cards that are exiled with it into the graveyard, meaning that they can no longer get them back, and then we get a 2/2 robot for each thing that gets put in the graveyard that way, which is pretty sweet. Which brings us to our last win con in Thrumming Hive Pool. This is a 6 mana artifact with affinity for slivers. I'm just playing this because I love it. I'm not gonna lie, it's just a flavor choice for me. I love slivers and I want to play a sliver card in standard so bad. But it's a decent win con, because it makes hasty double striking slivers every turn. And if we have an Elspeth on the battlefield, when we cast or when we play that, which it follows it up, it's 5/6. So like if we're really ahead on the board and we can afford to play both of those things in order, then we're making 4 hasty double strikey slivers, and that's just really awesome. So it's a repeatable creatures that come in with haste, so they get to attack at the turn they come in. And I think that that's really awesome. So I'm playing a single copy of this as a 5th win condition, and I think it's going to be fun. So we're trying it out. And then we're also playing 3 copies of Scene Rip as our last removal. When this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. This is going to be incredibly important, dealing with cauldrons, dealing with other, cheap creatures, aggressive creatures. Scene Rip is fantastic. It's basically Portable Hull 2.0, but it's an enchantment instead of an artifact, and I love it. So, and it's actually a combo with Pinnacle Starcage, sort of, because unlike before, where if we used a temporary lockdown, we would be exiling our own Scene Rips as too, but since Pinnacle Starcage only exiles artifacts and creatures, it does not hit our Scene Rips. So that's really friggin' awesome. It just really helps out. Then as far as the land base is concerned, we do get a really sweet land base. Like, boy, did we get a sweet land base, because we get Godless Shrine and Watery Grave as shocks, which lets us run almost all the verges in these 3 colors, because between the 4 copies of this, 4 copies of this, and then the 2 copies of Meticulous Archive, Undercity Sewers, and the 3 basics of each one of each color, we have a lot of actual swamp, island, plains cards to turn on these verges. So our mana base is phenomenal. Just really solid at making sure we have the colors we need on time, and almost all of it comes in untapped except for the couple of surveil lands. So really sweet deck. I think that this is definitely going to be a fun way to play control. I'm not usually a big control guy, but I really just felt like I couldn't resist building something with Consult the Stars, because this card is just insane, and I loved the way 0.0 Ballad looked, and I also wanted to place Thrumming Hive Pool, and I think that realistically, this card is only going to be good in one of 2 ways: playing the Leyline that turns all your creatures into a creature type of your choosing, which you could choose Sliver, and then all of a sudden this becomes pretty decent, or a control deck like this, where you're just looking for repeatable, damage every turn that can eventually slowly overwhelm your opponent. So I think that it's going to fit well in here, and I am excited to try this deck. So let me know what you think below. What changes would you make? Let me know. I want to hear. Let's get on to the next deck. All right, moving on, we have Jeskai Synthesizer. This is a deck that I feel like really benefits a lot from some of the new cards from the set. And it's just, I love Synthesizer. I've always loved Synthesizer. If you go back through my videos over the last year or 2, since the card has been released, I have definitely played a lot of Synthesizer lists, and this is no different. We are playing a United Battlefront version of the list. So United Battlefront is a 4-mana sorcery that says, look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 non-creature, non-land permanent cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest onto the bottom of your library in any order. Now, what's important about this is a lot of people think that they can get away with playing this with, a bunch of instants and sorceries, or even creatures and stuff like that in the deck, and you really can't, not for it to be good. Like Coco decks are Coco and a couple maybe non-creature spells, and then all creatures that can be hit by Coco. This is basically Coco for not creatures, and so you really need to make sure that your deck is as much of a concentration of things that you can hit off of this as possible, to make sure that you're not whiffing on being able to get at least 2 permanents into play for the 4 mana, and hopefully on average getting at least the 4 mana or more worth of permanents out of it, since the maximum 6. So why are we playing United Battlefront over a go big version of the deck? Honestly, because I just think it's the most consistent, and I think that this is one of those decks where when you resolve this on turn 4 and you hit a Synthesizer and something else, or if you already have a Synthesizer on the battlefield when you resolve this, it's just really hard to come back from. You just get so much value out of one card, and not to mention the fact that you're getting Synthesizer triggers, but you're also getting triggers from the other artifacts themselves, which there are quite a few new ones. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're playing a single copy of Tezzeret, Cruel Captain, just because he's a very solid planeswalker. He's colorless. He lets us untap artifacts or creatures and put counters on them, which isn't the most relevant part of it. But his passive says that he gets a loyalty counter whenever an artifact enters, and there are turns where we can put an immense amount of artifacts into play all at once, and so we could potentially just ultimate him in one turn after we play him, or even the turn that we play him, depending on how much mana we have. and his emblem is at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 3 counters on target artifact you control. If it's not a creature, it becomes a 0/0 robot creature until end of turn. So it turns all of these artifacts down here into creatures. And then not to mention, we can technically -3 and search our library for an artifact with mana value 1 or less and put it into our hand, which does let us go and fetch candy trails, which can gain us life and draw us cards, or enigma jewels, which can let us activate our repurposing bays, which the repurposing bay is kind of hiding over here behind my graphic of the cards that's popping up. So there are 3 repurposing bays in the deck to be able to pay 2 mana and sacrifice another artifact and go fetch something with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value, which this card got even better because we have Cryogen Relic now. So Cryogen Relic is like Ichor Wellspring, but it is blue instead of colorless. But when it enters or leaves, we draw a card. So when it enters, we draw a card. When we sack it to Repurposing Bay, we draw another card. And then we can also sometimes pay 2 mana to put a stun counter on something that's tapped, keep it from untapping during our opponent's untap step. And that can be pretty useful. But for the most part, we're using it to draw cards. And it's just a really solid 2-drop to have in the list to go with Repurposing Bay. As far as the other things from the new set go, we have 1 copy of Domination Bracelet, which is a crazy equipment. It's a 2-mana equipment with Equip 1. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has 15, pay 15 mana, exile Domination Bracelet. You control target opponent during their next turn. This ability costs X less to activate, where X is this creature's power. The reason this is in here is because there are turns where we make 10 tokens, you know, like this deck can go nuts. And sometimes, you know, we can make a ton of tokens in one turn and they're all 10/10, 12/12s, 15/15s, just crazy huge tokens, but we can't always necessarily attack. And I have built some versions of the deck in the past where we have like the Teamer Siege that can give them haste or things like that, but they're a little clunky and those things aren't artifacts, so they don't help the plan that much. So you're literally just including them to give haste to the robot tokens, and that's not always super consistent. So with a card like this, we can go and get this with Repurposing Bay by sacrificing a Candy Trail or an Enigma Jewel or something like that, and equip it to one of our huge robots and pay that trigger for free. Steal our opponent's next turn, have them swing all their stuff into our huge robots, block it all, kill it all, and then kill them on the backswing. So this card is nuts in a deck like this, especially where we can tutor it out and equip it at the opportune time. So very, very sweet include here. And I think it's going to make for some really great fun wins. And then we're also playing 2 copies of Warmaker Gunship. So this is a 3-mana spacecraft, and when it enters, it deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control to target creature and opponent controls. So being able to play this and trigger Synthesizer and it also be removal, Chainsaw was kind of like between Chainsaw and Spring-Loaded Saw Blades were kind of the go-to damage-based artifact removal in a deck like this, and they still are. But this triggers Synthesizer, which I think is fantastic. And it also can become a 4/3 flyer later on in the game by stationing, which we can half the time just use the token that we make with Synthesizer that turn to station this and turn it into a 4/3 flyer right away. So it's just a really solid card. We're running 2 of it. And I'd also like to point out that this trigger goes on the stack with the Synthesizer trigger going on the stack after it. So the tokens that we might get from the Synthesizer are going to increase the damage that this does, which is super awesome. So later in the game, if we get it off United Battlefront, the Synthesizer triggers can be ordered so that they go first and we get more artifacts out of it. And that way it deals more damage. So just a little fun combat trick that you can do there, kind of. And then we're playing a single copy of Worldwaker Helm because this can make copies of our awesome tokens. Single copy of Fabrication Foundry because it is ramp and it lets us get back our Synthesizers from the graveyard. Perilous Snares as removal. Clay-fired Bricks to help us keep our land drops consistent. Candy Trails and the Enigma Jewels are our 1-drops to help us get into our 2-drops with the Repurposing Bay. And Enigma Jewel is nice because it pay for the repurposing bay, so we can sometimes go turn 1 Enigma Jewel, turn 2 2-drop artifact, turn 3 repurposing bay, immediately sacrifice the 2-drop artifact and go get a synthesizer, thanks to the Enigma Jewel. And then obviously Chainsaw and Spring-Loaded Saw Blades are our removal. And then we're playing 24 lands. I did make the mistake of only adding 1 plains to this list, so I am going to change this land base a little bit and make sure that there are a couple more plains. I'm probably going to take out this Fabled Passage and one of these islands and go up to 3 plains just to make sure I have some plains to fetch with this Clay-Fired Bricks. But the life gain from this is really nice, and then sometimes even the craft side of it can save us in the, you know, it's a pretty sweet, you know, gives us a couple of tokens and gives all our creatures +1/+1, so this could even potentially help us win the game in the late game. So just a solid card to have in the deck and gives us some life gain. So with that, I think this deck is really sweet. I'm excited to play it. I'm really excited to try this Domination Bracelet out, slapping it onto some gigantic robots and ensuring our victory. And I'm loving the set so far. So I'd really love to know what you think about this deck. If you like it, please make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get into the next deck. All right, here we are with Mono Green Aggro. Boy, Mono Green Aggro got some upgrades with this set. It did lose a few things with rotation, but boy, this set really pushed it over the edge in my opinion, because now we finally have 2 solidly aggressive 1-drops in Mono Green. Where we only had really Paw Patch Recruit before. We are now looking at Edge Rover, a 1-mana 2/2 with reach that says when this creature dies, each player creates a lander token. So it's not when it enters. Like, you would almost think this would be like an enters the battlefield ability, and that way, because your opponent would immediately get to take advantage of the lander token, even if they don't kill it. But it's a death trigger, so if it survives, like, they never get a benefit, and it's just a 1-mana 2/2. Like, that's pretty crazy. And it's got reach, so it blocks crazy birds, you know, the bird fling deck that everybody's so sick of blocks it. And then it's symmetrical, so you get a lander token too, so it's not even like your opponent gets the only advantage. You get a lander token also. So this, paired with Paw Patch Recruit, gives us 8 1-drops, where I was playing Llanowar Elves before in this spot, or like Evolving Adaptive, which rotates, but Evolving Adaptive even wasn't that crazy good. So this is much better because it just immediately is a 2/2 with reach, so it can, you know, in the late game it's going to be much better than a 1/1 when you don't have anything to grow your Evolving Adaptive type of thing. And then we have Frenzied Baloth, which this is Questing Beast's little cousin. It's a green 3/2, can't be countered, trample, haste, creatures you control can't be countered, combat damage can't be prevented. That is a lot of text on a 2-drop, and it's got a decent body. What? It's a 2-mana 3/2 with all that text on it. It's got trample and haste. What? Boy, is this card crazy. I think that this has got to be one of the best 2-drops that Mono Green has gotten in a long time, alongside Keen-Eyed Curator, which is also a fantastic 2-drop, and also happens to provide us with a solid amount of graveyard hate in the deck, so that we're not just immediately scooping to those Reanimator decks. We are also playing 2 copies of Spinner of Souls and 2 copies of Sirach Elusive Hunter. These are going to be kind of our card advantage engines. Spinner of Souls giving us cards whenever something gets removed. Sirach giving us cards whenever something gets targeted by anything. And then we also have 3 copies of Tyvar the Pummeler, because you guys know how much I love Tyvar the Pummeler. He's got to be one of the best creatures printed in green in a while. Nobody ever reads him. They forget that he can get indestructible. They forget that he can pump your team into oblivion, and it's great. And he's just really good and hard to kill. So moving on down, we've got 4 copies of Hard-Hitting Question, because it's a 1-mana removal spell that deals to creatures and planeswalkers, and it's not a fight spell, it's just a bite spell, so super good card. We've got 2 copies of the new Biosynthetic Burst, which is a 2-mana, put a counter on something. It gains reach and trample and indestructible until end of turn, and untap it. Alongside 3 Defend the Riders. Both of these cards are just here to protect our creatures, give them hexproof and indestructible. Biosynthetic Burst is a little bit better because it untaps the creature, gives it reach, and also trample. So it could either help us win the game, or it could help us survive in a situation where our opponent thought that they had lethal 2 copies of Herd Heirloom as a little bit of ramp, and just the fact that you can spend that second ability to give a creature with power 4 or greater, which happens to be Spinner of Souls, Sirach, Elusive Hunter, Keen-Eyed Curator if its second ability gets turned on, and also Axebane Ferox, because this has Death Touch and Haste, and it's hard to target because your opponent has to be able to exile 4 cards out of their graveyard with mana value 4, sorry, not 4 cards. They have to be able to exile 4 mana value worth of cards out of their graveyard to target this, and when we've got Keen-Eyed Curator in the deck, we keep their graveyard pretty empty. So sometimes Axebane Ferox is just hexproof, and if you give it trample, well, then it's dealing damage anyway because it has Death Touch no matter what they block with. They can block it with a 15/15. It's still going to kill the 15/15 and deal 3 damage, which is pretty sweet. The rest of it is 21 forests and 2 demolition fields, so a total of 23 lands. Very simple, but man, is this deck going to be good. It's going to be super consistent and difficult to deal with. It's got a lot of sweet protection, a lot of redundancy in the cards. A lot of the cards just punish you for targeting them anyway. You got Ward on the Axebane Ferox. You know, we get a lander token if they kill this. You know, Keen-Eyed Curator is exiling their graveyard. Paw Patch Recruit's putting counters on things. These 2 guys are drawing us cards anytime anything gets targeted or dies. It's a sweet deck, and it's going to be really easy to pilot, in my opinion. It's not going to be a complicated deck to pilot, and I think this will do really good on day 1 of Edge of Eternity. So if you're a mono green enjoyer like myself, and you want to smash your opponents really hard in the face with a bunch of super sweet green creatures, this is the deck for you. Let's get on to the 4th one. All right, here we are with the 4th deck. This is Orzhov Aristocrats, based around Sephiroth. So we get a bunch of sweet updates in this new set for this archetype. But Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier, is the build around here. It is a 3-mana 3/3 that when it enters or attacks, we may sacrifice another creature if we do draw a card. And then whenever another creature dies, so yours or your opponent's, which is very sweet, your opponent loses a life and you gain a life, and if it happens 4 times in a turn, you transform Sephiroth and he turns into Sephiroth One-Winged Angel, which is a 5/5 flyer, and we get an emblem with that ability that gives us that drain every time something dies. So even if they remove Sephiroth from the rest of the game, anytime anything dies, we get life, they lose life. And then the supporting cast of cards we have are 4 copies of Nesting Bot and 4 copies of Infestation Sage as 1-drops that we can easily sacrifice, and then they put another token onto the battlefield, so it's basically like sacrificing them for free. And then we also have 3 copies of Voice of Victory. This is really sweet for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it makes it so our opponent can't cast removal on our turn, so if they want to remove something, they have to do it on their turn, which means that they don't get to react to what we do, which is fantastic. It's also got Mobilize too, so it's going to make 2 1/1 warriors when it attacks, and then those creatures get sacrificed at the end of turn. So if your opponent blocks them, we get the gain and drain from Sephiroth. If they don't block them, they get sacrificed at the end of turn, and we still get the gain and drain from Sephiroth. So we can have a turn where, you know, we flip Sephiroth on turn 3 if we play a 1-drop, you know, play Voice of Victory, attack with the Voice of Victory, they block the Voice of Victory and kill it. The 2 tokens get sacrificed, and then the thing we sacrificed when Sephiroth came into play died, so that's 4 triggers, and it's immediately flipped. So it really decentivizes them to block the Voice of Victory, so it makes attacking with it good even if we're attacking into a bad trade, because it puts them in a position where they have to say, is it worth killing the Voice of Victory when they get to flip Sephiroth? Probably not, so they're just going to let it get through, which means we get to keep his ability on the battlefield, and we get to keep getting those triggers off the Mobilize. Now, a couple of ways we're taking advantage of this is with Judge Master Gabranth, which anytime we sacrifice an artifact, or anytime an artifact or creature dies, he gets counters, so that means our Voice of Victory tokens. That means when we sacrifice an Infestation Sage or a Nesting Bot with Sephiroth, he's going to grow. He also has Menace, which is super sweet, makes him hard to block, and in the late game, that can just really make it tough for our opponents to stop us from getting through. 2 copies of Comball Profiteering Mare, because I know there are going to be a lot of tokens going around from other decks after this set releases. And so we're going to benefit from those. We're going to get copies of those tokens whenever they come into play. It's only going to happen once each turn, so our opponent can kind of manipulate what tokens we get. But either way, we're still going to drain them every time a token comes into play under our control, which means that when they cast something that gives tokens, we're going to get a copy and drain them. And then when we make tokens with our Voice of Victory or sacrificing these 1-drops, we're going to get copies of those, or not copies of them, but we're going to get drained from those tokens as well. So just a whole bunch, so many little ways to gain and drain. We've also got 3 copies of Vengeful Blood Witch, which is basically a 2-mana 1/1 that has Sephiroth's ability, so it's going to give us even more drain and gain. So we're just slowly grinding our opponent out, 1 little point of damage at a time. The big upgrades that we got from this set are Umbral Collar Zealot, which is a 2-mana 3/2 that says sacrifice another creature or artifact, surveil 1. Now you may be saying that we still have Bartolome, but Bartolome doesn't let us surveil. So the cool part about this is that it can make sure we're drawing good, you know, like we can sack stuff and make sure that we're getting good draws and that we're never drawing too many lands. It can really help us get a more consistent draw every game. And it's only 1 color, so it's a lot easier on us to be able to cast this in conjunction with other things if we just have a tough time getting the correct mana colors or whatever. Him only being 1 in a black versus black-white is significantly better, and it's a better body to start off with. You know, Bartolome is a 2/1, this one is a 3/2. Granted, it doesn't get bigger, but that's kind of why we have Judge Master Gabranth in the list, because he gets bigger every time we sacrifice or an artifact or creature. So basically that's the goal of the game, is to use these Infestation Sage, Nesting Bots, and Voice of Victories to make a whole bunch of tokens and then sacrifice them with Sephiroth and Umbral Collar, get triggers off of Sephiroth and Vengeful Blood Witch and Comball, and make huge Judge Master Gabranths and just go nuts. And then we're also playing a few other cool cards from this set in Hymn of the Faller, which is a 2-mana sorcery that says surveil 1, then draw a card and lose a life. But if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped, then we draw 2 cards. So this is 2 mana, draw 2 cards potentially, in a situation where it's not that hard for us to just sacrifice something to Umbral Collar Zealot without conditions, or to Sephiroth whenever he attacks, or just because, you know, we attacked and stuff died. Boom, 2 mana, draw 2 cards, lose 1 life, and there's a surveil attached to it. Like, man, talk about a good spell. We're only playing 2 of them because we really don't want to have too many non-creature, non-removal spells in the list, because we want to make sure that we can get stuff out of the way. But we're also playing 3 copies of Scout the Survivors, which is another ridiculous spell that comes out of this set. Another uncommon that just has an absolutely bonkers ability, in my opinion. It's 3 mana for a sorcery that says return up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. Now, in this particular deck, we're just probably trying to get back an Infestation Sage and a Voice, or 3 Infestation Sage Nesting Bot combo, or a Zealot and one of these 1-drops. The goal is just to get back a couple of things and put counters on them so that we can keep on sacrificing stuff and keep draining our opponent. But this card's really sweet in a lot of other ways, because there are a lot of X cost like creatures that have dies triggers and things like that, where you can get those back too. So like, I almost considered putting Market Back Walkers in this list, because we could get a Market Back Walker for free alongside 3 mana worth of stuff, and it comes with a counter on it. So it's really interesting. Scout for Survivors, though, I think is going to be a huge deal in this deck. And then I am playing 2 copies of Bitter Triumph and 3 copies of Get Lost. Playing a higher amount of Get Lost because we're playing Comball, so occasionally those map tokens are going to be symmetrical with Comball in the battlefield. And I like the fact that Get Lost can hit enchantments and stuff like that. So a little bit of a split there, leaning towards the Get Lost. And then I'm playing a single copy of Sothera the Super Void, which is a 4 mana legendary enchantment that says whenever a creature you control dies, creature, doesn't say non-token, just says creature. So this counts our Voice of Victory tokens and any other tokens that we make. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent chooses a creature they control and exiles it. At the beginning of your end step, if a player controls no creatures, sacrifice Sothera, then put a creature card exiled with it onto the battlefield under your control with 2 additional +1/+1 counters. This card is going to be nuts in this deck. I don't want to play more than 1 copy because it's legendary and because it is 4 mana and we are a very low to the ground deck, only playing 23 lands. But this card is so cool with this deck because it's difficult for us to not have creatures on the battlefield, because everything we sacrifice makes more tokens and we're reanimating stuff with Scout for Survivors. So Sothera the Super Void is basically just every time we sack something, we're moving something of our opponents and just tearing their board apart, and it's insane. And then if they block and our stuff dies, they lose more stuff, so it just makes blocking terrible for them. So as a one-of in this deck, this card is nuts, and I'm really excited to try it out. So keep your eyes on this. I might end up having to up this to 2 copies just because it feels really strong in a deck like this. And then 23 lands, we're just playing, you know, Bleachbone Verges, Concealed Courtyards, because thankfully those don't rotate. Single copy of Dalkovan Encampment and Fountain Port for making tokens and sacrificing tokens. 4 copies of Godless Shrine, because we're lucky and we do get a shock in these colors. Copy of Greater Ashen City to exile creatures from our graveyard in a desperation attempt if we need to make 1/1 white spirit tokens. Couple of plains, couple of swamps, couple of starting towns just to make sure we have our colors, and then 2 restless fortresses just so we have a win condition in the mana base alongside of the fountain ports. The deck is super sweet. I feel like this is going to be a powerhouse moving forward in this standard. Like, this deck just feels like it's really difficult to deal with. You know, almost everything can be just brought back with Scout for Survivors later, which I know Relive the Past is a thing, but this isn't, in my opinion, a Relive the Past kind of deck. And Scout for Survivors, in my opinion, is a little bit better because it brings the stuff back with counters on them. It's like Dewdrop Cure, like, but a little bit crazier. So I don't know. I love this deck. I think this is going to be super fun on the first couple of days of Edge of Eternities. So let me know what you think about it. Let me know what you would add, what you would change. I'd love to hear your opinions. And let's get on to the last deck. All right, here we are with Jund Landfall. I know I said this was my last deck, but this was actually the first deck that I brewed. After I got the full catalog of cards from Edge of Eternities, this was the deck that I was kind of the most excited about. So I saved the best for last, and it's a doozy. So this is a Jund Landfall list, and it's not the kind of landfall you think. It's about damaging our opponents from landfall. So we're playing 4 copies of Iridescent Vine Lasher, which every time a land comes into play, we deal 1 damage to an opponent, and we can offspring it and make an extra copy of it for 2 mana. We're playing 4 copies of Sabotender, which does the same thing. It's a 2/1 with reach and says whenever a landfall happens, we deal damage to our opponent. And then the new card from the new set, Tanuk, Memorial Ensign, a 3 mana 2/4. So that's a good body. It makes it difficult to remove with burn spells, and it doesn't die to too many things. And it's a decent blocker that has the same trigger as them, except for if we trigger it a second time, we get to draw a card. So now all of our Fabled Passages and our Escape Tunnels are drawing us a card when he's on the battlefield and dealing 2 damage, which is insane. So a couple of ways that we're taking some extra advantage of this. We're playing 3 copies of Traveling Chocobo because I don't think a lot of people just realize that this doesn't need to be played in a birdie deck. It says if a land or bird you control entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So if we have a Traveling Chocobo on the field, all of our Vine Lashers, Sabotenders, and Tanuks ping twice per land. So that means that a Fabled Passage is 4 damage alone just from a Traveling Chocobo. And if we go in with, you know, turn 1 Vine Lasher, turn 2 Sabotender, turn 3 Traveling Chocobo, into turn 4 Oger Axonil, all of a sudden we're dealing, you know, 8, 10, 12, you know, just crazy amounts of damage just with 1 land from Oger Axonil and the doubling up of Traveling Chocobo with all the different creatures that we have in play. So this deck can get out of hand really, really quickly. And then we're also taking advantage of this crazy 8-drop Famished Worldsire, which is a 8 mana Ward 3 Devour Land 3. There's only 2 copies in the list, but I mean, we do have ways to ramp in this list. So it's not unreasonable that we get to cast this but this is sort of like this is like the top end WinCon alongside of something like Lumra Bellow of the Woods. But so Devour Land 3 is basically when we sacrifice a land, it's going to enter with 3 counters on it for each land that we sacrifice when it enters. And then its ability is insane. When this creature enters, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is this creature's power, put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So 9 times out of 10, this is going to get you more lands than you sacrificed. Like 9 times out of 10, because even if you ramp up to this, like with non-land ramp, if you have 5, 6 lands on the battlefield and you sacrifice this, you're talking 15, 18 power. You're digging 18 cards deep for lands. Like, you're going to hit a lot of lands off this. And in this deck, we are playing mostly land ramp with things like Larval Scoutlander and World Souls Rage and Spelunking to help us get more lands on the battlefield. So we're casting most of our lands onto the battlefield, so we're not playing a lot of non-land ramp. So when this enters, we're probably going to be able to devour land for 8, which means we get to look at the top 24 cards of our library and put lands onto the battlefield, which means if we have an Iridescent Vine Lasher or a Sabotender or a Tanuki on the battlefield, we're going to be getting a ton of triggers from it. Not to mention the fact that it would be a 24/24 with Ward 3, which is nothing to shake a stick at. So the last new card up here in the creatures that we have is Biotech Specialist. It's a 2-mana 1/3. When it enters, we get a Lander token. Lander tokens are a new kind of token that says you can pay 2 mana to sacrifice it and put a basic land onto the battlefield. So it's a really, really sweet 2-drop that just helps us get lands out of our deck and trigger our landfalls when we want to, because this is sort of like a delayed ramp. But the neat part about this too is that we're also running 3 copies of Larval Scoutlander. This is another new card from Edge of Eternities. It's a spacecraft for 3 mana. When the spacecraft enters, you may sacrifice a land or lander. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Why is this really good? Because if we go turn 2 Biotech Specialist, Larval Scoutlander can sacrifice the Lander token from the Specialist, deal 2 damage to the opponent, which is helping us with our pinging plan, and it gets 2 lands, and we don't have to give up the lands that are already on the battlefield. So we're going from 3 mana to 5 mana with this nice little 1/2 punch. It's really sweet. I actually might end up swapping in, you know what? I'm gonna do it right now, actually. I think I'm gonna take one of these Sabotenders out, and I think I'm going to increase, like, as I'm looking at it and explaining it to you, I'm just like, that's just too good. So we're going to go ahead and go with 3 Sabotenders and 3 Biotech Specialists, because, you know, that still leaves us with 10 land pingers, which is more than enough. And then it gives us a really sweet turn 2, turn 3 play here. You know, there's turn 1 Vine Lasher, turn 2 Bio Specialist, turn 3 Larval Scoutlander is dealing like a total of like 6 damage just from landfall triggers and the Biotech Specialist trigger, all by turn 3. That's really solid. And then not to mention the fact that it can become a 3/3 with flying later on in the game if we station it for 7, which is, you know, probably not going to happen that much, but it will happen sometimes. And then as far as sorceries go, we have 2 copies of World Soul Rage to just deal extra damage and get more lands back from our graveyard, which can help us re-trigger our Fabled Passages and Escape Tunnels. And then to take advantage of the fact that we're playing a lot of like Fabled Passage, Escape Tunnel-y kind of stuff, we're also playing 3 copies of Spelunking, which is going to let us draw a card and then put an extra card onto the battlefield. But lands enter untapped. So now all of our Escape Tunnels, Fabled Passages, anything we get back from the graveyard with Lumra or World Soul Rage is going to come back untapped. So we're going to be able to use that mana right away. And that's just super useful. We're playing 3 copies of Bitter Triumph and 3 copies of Torch the Tower as our removal, and 2 copies of Sea Chip Impact, because this also makes a lander if we destroy an artifact enchantment that was 2 or less. But this is basically our artifact and enchantment hate, and it lets us deal with whatever pesky things we're you know, getting stressed by, and make a lander token that we can sacrifice to the Larval Scoutlander. And then the land base is basically all basic lands, 4 copies of Fabled Passage, 2 copies of Escape Tunnel. I didn't want to run a full 4 and 4 because it was making it difficult to make sure I had enough lands to fetch out of the deck with Larval Scoutlanders, as well as the lands. So, you know, if you look at these cards between the Larval Scoutlanders, the Fabled Passages, and then also if we end up actually sacrificing the lander tokens, we need a lot of basics in the list. And so we've got 2 copies of Pit of Offerings to help us potentially get some of the colors that we need. It's also a cave, so we can gain some life off Spelunking if we put a Pit of Offerings onto the battlefield. But it's also Graveyard Hate, so it's in the land base, baked in Graveyard Hate to help us deal with Reanimator decks. And most Reanimator decks are playing spells that are the colors that we are, because they're either reanimating Galta or Valgavoth or whatever, and those things are going to provide us with colors that we need for our deck anyway. So a couple of those, and then a lot of basics to make sure we have things to search with our Fabled Passages and Escape Tunnels, especially because if we're getting them back with World Soul Rages and Lumra Bellow over the Woods, we're going to be getting back these Fabled Passages so we can keep double triggering those landfall abilities. And yeah, I think this deck is just going to be super fun and grindy. It kind of reminds me a lot of the Orzhov Aristocrats list, but with a totally different twist, and some crazy win cons in the late game if we don't end up pinging with things like Famished Worldsire and Lumra Bellow of the Woods. And yeah, this deck's really freaking sweet. So I hope that you think it's as cool as I do. and I can't wait to play these for you guys. I'm going to be playing these guys on day 1 of Edge of Eternity Standard. I'll have a special stream that will be the Tuesday of release instead of on Wednesday like I normally do, and I'll be streaming a little bit earlier in the day and for a little bit longer. So if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. I'll be going live probably around 5 p.m. that day, streaming until like 10 o'clock probably, and playing all these decks for you and more. We'll be brewing all kinds of fun stuff. Again, if you want to go over to my Mox field, I'm going to leave that link in the description. All these decks, as well as every other standard deck that I've built in recent history, will be on that Mox field page. Make sure you leave a like over there, follow me, so that I can get this out to more people and spread all the fun and joy to everyone. So there are also going to be links to my Discord in the description if you'd like to join my community and chat with me directly, share deck list with me that you'd like maybe to see me play on day 1 of Edge of Eternities. Make sure you hit that Discord link, join the Sev Squad Discord today, and talk with me directly because I'm pretty active there and it's a great way to reach me. So with that, I hope you enjoyed these decks. I hope you're excited about Edge of Eternities. I'm ready to sling some spells in space and beat some face in space. So let's get to it and let's have fun. I'll catch you guys in the next one.